Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I pray you all are doing well and had a good Fajr Salat. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us to verse 43 in Surah An-Nisa. And this is a special verse in the Quran because it speaks about intoxication. It speaks about one of the early commands to avoid drinking alcohol, and also speaks about tayammum. So this is the verse that speaks about that if you do not have water, then you would engage in tayammum to pray. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we've seen in this beautiful surah, in Surah An-Nisa, speaks about the issues of law, speaks about issues of rituals, about marriage. And in this discussion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us key principles to live our lives, and how to be believers and ibad, that we're people that worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins this verse by saying, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So here the ulama, the mufassirin, they say that this verse is directed to the believers. There are verses in the Quran that speak to the kuffar, that speak to the munafiqeen, they speak to different parts of the community. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking directly to those who have iman in their hearts. And He begins and says, "La taqrabu as-salata wa antum sukara." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do not enter or come close to prayer except that you are not intoxicated. Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here that you shouldn't come close to prayer if you have drinking alcohol and you don't know what you're going to say. Hatta ta'lamu ma taqulun. As the translation says, do not come anywhere near prayer if you are intoxicated, not until you know what you are saying. And here the ulama, they emphasize the importance of salah and the importance of khushu', that when someone comes to the prayer, that they know exactly what they're saying and they can focus on it. And they cite this asbab al-nuzul, that some of the people during the time, the companions, they will come to salah and they were intoxicated. SubhanAllah, it's difficult for us to understand or to think about it. But they had just drank alcohol and they would begin to recite in their prayer. And some of them in Surah Al-Kafirun, we say, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. We say to the kuffar that we do not worship what you worship. But the Sahaba, some of them, because they were intoxicated and they didn't know what they were saying, they say, نَحْنُ نَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. That we worship what you worship. So they began to become confused in the Quran to the point that they didn't know what they were saying. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says here, make sure that when you come to salah, that you know what you are saying. And this is one of the reasons, eventually, of the tahrim of the alcohol, is that one of the reasons why it's prohibited is that someone does not have their rationality. Someone does not have the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. And sometimes they don't even know what they're saying or doing. And this is dangerous when you're aql. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the aql and emphasizes the importance of the rationality and being able to distinguish between right and wrong. When that is gone, then anyone can do something unlawful, commit a crime, could also hurt other individuals. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, make sure when you come to the prayer, you know exactly what you are saying. Here the ulama, they emphasize the importance of khushu' and other moments when you may come to prayer and you may be distracted. So one example is extreme tiredness. When someone is very, very tired and they are unable to concentrate and they don't even know what they're saying, then they should sleep a little bit and then come back and pray. As the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, إِذَا نَعَسَ أَحَدَكُمْ فِي الصَّلَاةِ فَلْيَرْقُدْ حَتَّى يَذْهَبَ عَنْهُمُ النَّوْمِ. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, if one of you are tired and you're na'san, meaning almost like you're drifting and you cannot concentrate, then that person should go to sleep until that the sleeping, the tiredness goes away. فَإِنَّهُ لَا يَدْرِي لَعَلَّهُ يَسْتَغْفِرُ فَيَسَبُّ نَفْسُهُ. That he says that you don't know, maybe during your salah, you began to curse yourself. Instead of praying for yourself and praying for the ummah and for the community, you began to ask forgiveness and curse, and you become confused. Another example is extreme hunger. If someone is very hungry and the time of prayer comes, that person should eat something and then go to prayer. As the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, إِذَا حَدَرَ الْعَشَاء وَقِيمَ الصَّلَاةِ فَلْيَبْدَأُوا بِالْعَشَاءِ. That if the time of Isha, Salat al-Isha occurs, and the prayer, you hear the call to prayer, then start with eating. Make sure you eat something when you come to prayer, that you're not so hungry and you're unable to even concentrate on what you're saying or even listen to the actual Quran. And the Mufassirin, they cite here the famous verse in Surah Al-Mu'minun, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. So the believers are successful. Why are they successful? Because in their prayer, they have khushu'. So we should ask ourselves, what is distracting us from our prayer and making us not concentrate? Is it our cell phone? Is it that we're not getting enough sleep? Are we hungry? The khushu' is a priority in the salah, and that's one of the reasons eventually that the alcohol was prohibited, because it was preventing someone from getting the khushu' and the necessary concentration. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, وَلَا جُنُبَ إِلَّا عَابِرَ السَّبِيلِ حَتَّى تَغْتَسِلُوا. So then it explains that the person in a state of janaba, they had physical relations, or a sister on her cycle, and someone abir as-sabil. And there are two interpretations here. Either one of them is a musafir, someone who is traveling and is in a state of janaba. Another one is someone who is just crossing through the masjid, that they're moving from one side of the masjid, they're not sitting down, they're not praying. They shouldn't come close to the prayer except that they do ghusl. They take a complete shower and they ritually purify themselves. Of course, the ulama, they say the mu'min is not najis, that the believer is never intrinsically impure. This is ritually impure. That we know the hadith, that a companion came and he saw the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam from a distance, and he was coming the same way, and then he moved. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked him, like, why did you avoid me? And he said that I'm in a state of janaba. I'm najis. And he said the believer is not najis. So none of us are najis intrinsically or dirty, but rather we're ritually najis, impure, meaning we have to do wudu or we have to do ghusl before we come to our prayer. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن كُنتُم مَرْضَى أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ أَوْ جَاءَ أَحَدٌ مِّنكُم مِّنَ الْغَائِطِ أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً. And this is the famous verse of tayammum. فَلْيَتَمَمَّمُوا سَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, now if some of you are sick, meaning that you are unable to do wudu, someone's in a state that they just had surgery, they have a cut on their arm or on their face, and if they put water on that spot, it could actually harm them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want harm. Also, He wants yusr, He wants ease. He doesn't want, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants life. هو الحي القيوم. He is the one that is living and sustaining, yuhyi wa yumit, and He gives life. He doesn't want any of us to harm ourselves physically and spiritually. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if someone is sick, they're traveling, let's say they're on a travel and they cannot find water, or they come from min al-gha'it. And here the ulama, they talk about what is gha'it. Gha'it is kinaya in Arabic, a euphemism, meaning someone went to the bathroom. And gha'it, literally in Arabic, is like a wadi, a little indentation or a ditch in the earth. The Arabs, they used to go to the bathroom in the desert, in a ditch, and then they would cover it up. أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ. Or you, literally it means touch a woman, or touch someone of the opposite gender. Here the ulama, they say, lamasa means jama' or nikah, meaning physical relationships with the opposite gender. فَلَمْ تَجِدُوا مَاءً. So if someone is in these categories, so you're traveling, you're in a place you can't find water, you are sick, you cannot put water on your body, you just went to the restroom, you had physical relationships with a spouse, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives an expiation. Then فَلْيَتَمَمَّمُوا. Then you can do tayammum. And this is important, that sometimes people immediately do tayammum if they don't see water. If you know that water is in your vicinity, then you should try to get that water and do the proper wudu. But if you're in these categories, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then you can do tayammum. And then how you do tayammum? You find a sa'idan tayyiba. And there's different fiqh definitions of this. But the general one is you find a piece of earth and dirt that's clean, that you don't see any najis on that, and you hit it twice. صَيْن طَيِّبًا, and then فَامْسَحُوا بِوُجُوهِكُمْ وَأَيْدِيكُمْ, that you put your hands on your face and then on your hands. Here, there's a discussion that is it just your hands or do you go up to your elbows? Because in the ayah of wudu, it says إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ. It says go to your elbows. But here it doesn't say that. But still the ulama, many of them, majority would say go to your elbows because this is also considered part of your yad or your hand. So this is very easy to do the tayammum, and then someone would eventually go and then pray. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَفُوًا غَفُورًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pardons and He is the most forgiving. And this is a beautiful ending to this verse because it connects us to the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one of the reasons why we study the fiqh with the ayat. Because when you study the fiqh with the ayat, it connects you back to tawheed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will pardon us. We may make mistakes in wudu and tayammum and ghusl. All these things, there may be a minor mistake that we make, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability to pardon us and the ability to forgive us. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. So we see, to conclude, these verses in the Quran, these verses are so beautiful because they talk about the gradual development of the community. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately could have said that khamar is haram. But He first said, do not come close to salat when you're intoxicated. Showing the importance of salat in the community, the importance of khushu', and that you're supposed to focus in your prayer. And we see this is important even today with our youth, that there is a crisis in America of opioids, of vaping, of overdoses. As a child, as someone who has children who are youth, every single year we get alerts of youth dying because of a drug overdose. And this is, subhanAllah, very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains, do not take any intoxicant into you that leaves your mind, that you don't know what you're saying. You don't have the ability to articulate yourself. So this is something as a community we need to be very careful of. We need to educate our youth to make sure that they continue to live and experience their adulthood. And alhamdulillah, here at Adams, we've had actually workshops where we teach people how to treat someone, Narcan, with a drug overdose. And this is one of the reasons why it's important as a community that we speak out against this ill in our society, that we don't want our youth, our young people, our adults to intake such a drug that could prevent them from focusing on the important things in their life. We also see the importance of making the salawat accessible. And this is such a beautiful aspect in the Quran, that if you cannot pray standing, then you pray sitting. We have chairs here. If someone cannot pray sitting, then they lie down. وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the person who is standing, they're sitting, they're on their side. Whatever situation you are in, you continue the ibadah. Because أَرْضُ اللَّهِ وَاسِعَةٌ. And we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala connects the salawat to this earth. Fajr is when the sun comes up. Dhuhr is when the sun is at zenith. Maghrib is after when the sun comes down. Isha is when you can begin to see the stars in this full night. And here in Tayammum, we connect with the earth. We connect with the earth that belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is important that we continue the prayer. Someone could say, there's no water here, I can't do wudu, I can't pray. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, I'm giving you expiation. You should continue to pray in whatever state you are. And then finally, we see the verse ends with forgiveness. That in our ibadat, there's different fiqh, there's a different ahkam. And in our effort to practice the salawat, the fasting, the zakat, we may make a mistake. But we always go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and realize He's afu, He pardons us, and He is ghafoor, He is forgiving. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.